Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Crosshairs, the Print's weekly show on national security. A special edition because we're joined today by Pia Krishnankutty, our correspondent who is in Tel Aviv in Israel, right in the wake of the big election developments this week and the election of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We're also joined by Kabir Taneja, an eminent scholar of the region and India from the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi. Pia, if I may go first to you, extraordinary win by Benjamin Netanyahu, a very controversial figure in Israeli politics. What's the mood that you've encountered among Israelis as you've traveled in different parts of the country?
Right. So I've traveled to Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, as well as, in the north near Golan Heights and in the south near Gaza. And the mood seems to be, yes, Bibi, no Bibi. As far as issues goes, as far as inflation goes, that's not as much as a priority. It's very much identity politics at this point. And from the mood I get from the different cities, I feel as though in Jerusalem, it's a little more conservative, whereas in Tel Aviv, it's more mixed. And what's interesting is I, in fact, went to a little village, not too far from Gaza, maybe a km. I might be butchering the name, but it's called Netiv Hasara. And I met a very interesting woman there. She's sort of the community spokesperson. Her name is Hila Fenlon. And she actually told me that over the last year, they've had the quietest year. And that's when Bennett and Yair Lapid have been in power. And she actually had a lot of fears that going forward, it could polarize the situation vis-a-vis Palestine even more. So that's fairly the mood I get. But what's also interesting is that I went to the north, closer to the Golan Heights, and I met an Arab boy who voted for an Arab party called Balad or Tajamo in Arabic. And they don't recognize the state of Israel. And this is the first time that Balad actually did not join the 4 other Arab parties as part of the joint list bloc. And it actually did its own solo run. Interestingly, Balad was just short of the 3.25% majority vote needed for a national party to secure a seat. So it's not got any seats, but it was very close. In fact, so the Times of Israel did an interesting piece on how Balad's sort of failed run is failed for now, but perhaps in the next election, we could see some success for an Arab party going solo. So that's about it.
And we'll just listen in to some of those people Pia interviewed to give you a first-hand sense of what people are saying.
I vote for Netanyahu as a Likud, called the party called Likud.
And why?
And because we have experience with him like 10 years ago. He was 10 years and he was very good. The economy became better and we live nice, and compared to most of the world was problem. Even in the Corona time, was very hard, but here we flew like on the water.
My name is Elias. I am Christian in Israel. It's not Israel, it's Palestine, the first. Second, right now it's Israel. I vote for the Jamua. It's the person of the Jamua, Sami Abu Shahadi. Why I voted for him? Because this is a new one. This is the first time we go to Parliament, like that one, like that, or Knesset in Hebrew, in Israel. We need 1,050 votes because go to the Knesset. What the meaning of Knesset is, it's for vote for Israel, vote something important for Israel. I don't know in English the meanings, but these things what I.
Why didn't you vote for Netanyahu?
I don't vote for Netanyahu because we have many problems in Israel. Netanyahu, he go with the Jewish people, not the people. It's good people. It's not good people for us because that.
And you are
Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, Smotrich. I don't know what in English the meaning, but in Arabic عنصرية. Because he want to go to Jerusalem and take the Aqsa and
the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
yeah, and put هيكل ثالث. In English I don't know what the meaning هيكل ثالث, like the church for him, for the Jewish.
Okay, I chose the left wing in Israel, that is made from a few parties. I wanted Yair Lapid, who's the current prime minister, to continue, so I chose him officially. But in the day of the vote, I realized that one of my favorite parties, Meretz, is under risk. So at the last minute, I changed my vote and I vote Meretz, just to make sure that they will be a part of the future parliament. Unfortunately, they didn't pass, and that's a great shame for Israel. But I definitely would wanted to see Meretz with the current Prime Minister Yair Lapid continuing. I think they had a wonderful job in the last year. We had the quietest year that we ever had in the last 21 years here in this region. And unfortunately, the extremists, I can also say some of them are racist, came in power, will become in power. And for me, that's shocking. This is not Israel, and we will fight for Israel to become liberal and peace, active, peace, asking for peace again. No, don't put that.
I'll go to you, if I may, Kabir, and just quickly ask, this victory of Benjamin Netanyahu, big friend of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, strong personal relationship, but also fears being voiced that this coalition that's come to power in Israel might take a more aggressive and destabilizing regional posture, that this could lead to an escalation of tensions with Palestinians within Israel. Can you give us a sense of how the regional picture around these election results might play out, particularly in the Middle East, and we can come to India after that?
Yeah, thanks. It's weird because I remember we were talking about just this in one of the Western capitals not long back, and there were already predictions, a couple of months ago, that Netanyahu is going to make a comeback, and that was largely, not necessarily just because of Netanyahu. He's a political eternal, right? He's always in the shadows looking for his chance to retain what he believes he lost unfairly some time ago. And since then, we've had 5 general elections in Israel. So along with a lot of sort of regional composition and domestic political turmoil in Israel, I think there's a lot of just fatigue in Israel as well. They wanted to see something just come up which may not collapse within 3 months or is not a power sharing agreement like it has been in the past 1 year. So there was, even within the Israeli certain, diplomatic community in Israel, they were like, oh, well, I don't know what is going to happen. Again, we'll have to wait and watch. But, from a regional perspective, Netanyahu is very well known. So that's a positive for the region. It's not despite, the coalition of the far right, the ultra-Orthodox that he has sort of knitted together, or is still expected to knit together. We are still waiting for the composition. I think there are not going to be any major surprises per se. If the power sharing agreement that Netanyahu comes up with gives a lot of space to the far right in internal security, we may see a much more hardened stand against the Palestine issue and on what happens in Gaza and what happens with Hamas, and by association, Israel's Iran policy. All of which still works in Netanyahu's favor, because it is not, even though there's a Democrats government in Washington right now, that JCPOA euphoria that they were chasing some time ago is not there anymore. It's a much more pragmatic take against Tehran, which works for him. And, and certain sort of neighbors for Israel, such as Saudi Arabia, are actually on the same page. They are also, we just saw today that there is a collapse of the Iran-Saudi dialogue hosted by Baghdad as well. So, I don't think there's going to be any sort of major shockers, but a stable sort of lasting government in Israel is actually works in favor of regional dynamics going forward.
Right. And Pia, I wanted to come back to this question you'd raised about identity politics sort of being the pole, if you like, around which this election was fought and how ordinary people are reacting. Um, can you give us a little sense of that? Is the Israel that you've seen a society that is very divided on things like women's rights or LGBTQ rights? Are the grievances against Netanyahu to do with his purported corruption, which of course led to his downfall and remains the subject of a Supreme Court case?
So I don't think the average is very preoccupied with the corruption charges. And obviously, I'm not saying it's not a factor, but I just don't think it's a priority when they go to the ballot booth. And we also have to remember that that Likud and its alliance, they only secured 50.5% of the popular vote didn't go to that bloc. So
Right.
it is, if you look at the numbers, it is divided. And if you look at the mood on the ground, there is as Kabir was talking about, a sense of let's just get a stable government together. Let's not waste any more time. We've had 5 elections in the last 3.5 years, almost 4 years. So I think people are frustrated, and it depends on which part of Israel you're from, as I described in the beginning. It can be different. But what's also interesting is, just from an Indian perspective, it'll be interesting to see who his defense pick is. If the defense pick comes from the religious Zionist movement, the leader of that movement, Smotrich, that'll be interesting because India is the largest buyer of Israeli arms. And also they get $4 billion US in US aid. And I mean, the defense minister would be in charge of that. So it would be interesting from an Indian perspective also.
Really interesting. Kabir, a question for you here is, how is Washington likely to react to the rise of this fringe element if it does occupy key ministerial positions? We've seen some newspaper reports about, not very final, but about some unhappiness about in Washington about Netanyahu's possible pick for public security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir. Few other noises here and there. Do you see this as being significant, or will, as in the past, the Washington and Tel Aviv, Jerusalem make their peace one way or the other?
Yeah, look, Praveen, I think that is the main issue in front of Netanyahu now. Like his composition, we've already seen reports that the US is quote unquote not keen to work with certain people in the defense portfolio, are not keen to work with certain people in the internal security portfolios. But ultimately, I think Netanyahu will stitch together what works. And I think US will have to deal with that and work with whatever construct that is. Now, because we have heard over the past many years now, how Israeli security is non-negotiable from an American foreign policy point of view. And I think they can't afford to deviate too far away from that. Especially when an Israeli government at this point of time is much more warm towards the Republican Party than to the Democrats. So, so I don't think there will be a choice for at least the Biden administration, considering they still have some time left. But they may make noises. They may sort of publicly say that this may not be an ideal candidate. This is very difficult to deal with, or even chastise them publicly once they do take their seat in Israel. Whatever the government sort of comes up with. But at the end of the day, they'll have to work with what's on offer.
Right. Pia, one of the things that fascinated me in your early remarks in this conversation was, you said you'd spoken to this woman in a village, and she'd actually said the last year had been relatively peaceful, which is kind of, interesting. Because one has this impression of Israel as a place where fears about terrorism, about possible war with Iran, run very deep. Among ordinary people that you spoke to, is this sense of fear still very strong? And what was the sense you got about people's prognosis of the future? Are they pessimistic about what happens with the Palestinians? Are they pessimistic about the prospects with Iran? Are they concerned about an escalation of violence going forward? Or are people sort of more focused on the economy and, of course, the kind of post-COVID challenges every country is struggling with?
So I think if you live in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, you're not really, I mean, the sense I got is you're not going to be preoccupied with the Palestinian question as much as the identity politics that I described. The woman from Netiv Hazara is not an anomaly, but I was speaking to a lot of Israeli journalists here, and they said that she represents maybe 10% of the vote, because she represents the border people, or rather the people closest to the border. I'm talking about the Gaza Strip. So she lives about a km from the Gaza Strip. And when she said it's been the quietest years, not that she said, oh, there have been no rockets or that there have been no alarms, because, being a km from the border, there are alarms even when a rocket is coming. So it's not like that has stopped. It's just reduced and become, in her words, a little less quiet. But whether people in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and sort of the inner parts of Israel are dealing with that same circumstance, no, they're not. So I do think it's different for people living in the bigger cities. And I also wanted to add something about what Kabir was talking about when you asked him the question about what the US will have to deal with, or the US having its eyes on this election and how Netanyahu is going to form his government. So recently, Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president, was caught on a hot mic saying, the whole world is worried that Ben-Gvir is going to maybe assume a key position. So I think the Israeli administration is very much aware that the world is worried about whether far-right players will get positions in key positions. So that awareness is there. But I feel like I went a little bit on a tangent there as far as...
No, that's really interesting. And that brings me to the question I wanted to ask Kabir. So a very robust and important defense relationship between India and Israel. Obviously, the concerns Washington may have about the nature of the coalition, the direction it will take with Israel, not such a big issue in India. But will a potential hardening on Iran, the knockoffs across the Middle East, be something that New Delhi itself is worried about? Because the last thing I assume India wants at this stage is any sort of rocking of the boat, which could potentially impact energy markets, which could create instability in the Middle East. What will New Delhi's thinking on these challenges be?
So, look, on this front, when it comes to the Middle East and how India deals with the Middle East, there's a lot of praying involved that the boat is not rocked. Right? So, because there's very little you can do about it unless you are directly involved. I know the only country directly involved is the US. And really, I don't think anyone really wants that piece of pie. Even someone like China that we keep reading about is going to make sort of strategic gains in the Middle East. Around the debates about US recession, US power recession in the Middle East. I don't think even Beijing is that keen to actually fill up that role. Look, when Netanyahu's victory was reported, we already saw some rockets being fired from Gaza towards Israel. Right. And when it comes to Iran, look, I think Netanyahu is going to have a much more sterner look at Tehran compared to his immediate predecessors that are leaving office right now. And now with an increased sort of Iranian play in Ukraine, helping out with Russia, there are a lot of other factors to be considered. It's not just a very sort of Iran, Israel, or Iran, Saudi, or the US involved. There are other factors being sort of coming into play now. I don't particularly see a major sort of rocking of the boat in any time coming soon in the Middle East. I think there are other spaces that the US and Western countries are involved with now, especially in Europe. They're seeing Europe as going through a critical phase, and there's very little sort of penchant towards setting something to fire in the Middle East right now. That's why you see, yeah.
If I may interrupt you for just a second, if I can draw you out, Kabir.
Yeah.
I mean, a worst case scenario would be that an Iranian regime that is facing a great deal of internal unrest doesn't strike a deal with the West and decides to go down that path to actually having a deliverable nuclear device. If we end up going down that road, and I know that's a big if, but if we end up going down that road, do you see Netanyahu's government directly attacking Iran to try and knock out its nuclear program? Or do you think it will do whatever it does in concert with the United States and other allies?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Look, it's a crystal ball gazing situation on that, right? But we have to remember that all said and done, Israel has very good capacities and has displayed very good capacities of setting back the Iranian nuclear program. So whenever required, they have already targeted significantly within Iran to make sure that if not, by a couple of years, by at least a couple of months, set the program back so that they have enough time to sort of come up with a response. Whether that's a military response or a diplomatic one is an ongoing debate. But I do think that if it comes to that position where they see that the military response is the only option, they will definitely go for it, I think.
Over the next few days of your Israel visit, we hope to be hearing more about this story. And I hope our readers will be following your reporting. Pia Krishnankutty's articles, of course, appearing regularly on the Print's website. You can also follow her on Twitter or the Print's Twitter handle. Kabir, a final question for you. I mean, we talk a lot about the India-Israel defense relationship, but it's also had a bunch of spin-offs into things like the agricultural sector, into technology. What is your sense of how big a relationship this is going to evolve into? On the one hand, you have a fantastic relationship with Israel on these spheres of cooperation, but the big sort of engine of India in the Middle East, still its energy security interests in the Persian Gulf, as of course, the huge Indian diaspora in countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Do you foresee a situation where balancing these poles might become a problem under Netanyahu? Or is it going to be pretty much business as usual, as we've seen, with India finding a middle path between these, if you like, two sides of the coin?
Yeah, look, I think when it comes to India-Israel, there are three major factors that drive the euphoria around it. And I'm keeping aside the Netanyahu-Modi bonhomie. That's a lot of PR. But on the side of it, the actual deliverables, there are three things. I think ideology between the current governments is something that, of course, is attractive through the supporters of both sides. The second is the fact that historically Israel was available as a partner to India when India needed it the most, especially during the 70s and the 80s, and during that time when India actually did not have direct relations with Israel. And third, of course, is the availability of Israel to supply certain technologies to India, no holds barred, right? So it's and there are very few countries in the world that are willing to do that. So
right.
So these are the three driving factors. Now, the complications there are no complications at this point of time, but complications can come up. Let's say, for example, the recent report that, the UAE, as part of the larger Abraham Accords construct, has deployed the Barak 8 defense systems, which is an Israel-India sort of collaboration. Now, earlier you would, of course, say that, so this kind of collaboration would be only operated by either India or Israel. The fact that it's in the UAE sort of, brings in India into a certain situation where, even Iran can raise that question that, are your technologies are now being actually deployed to certain countries that we are at odds with? And how does that work? So is that a policy shift? Is that you balancing? Is that you taking a side? And, India is a historic fence sitter. I don't think the answers are going to come easy to these kinds of
So I just a quick follow-up for you, Kabir. Israel's quite good at that fence sitting too, right? After all, it does have a good relationship with China. It's been accused at various times of supplying American technologies denied to China through the back door. It's tried to maintain a balance on the Russia issue. Does that fence sitting make India and Israel natural partners, or is it a hindrance in a time of a dividing and fracturing world? Will Israel, for example, go along with a containment policy on China, which India might very much like?
Yeah, I think, look, the India's fence sitting is much more institutional than what Israel's is. Israel can fence it all it wants. Ultimately, it does need the American security umbrella to survive under, at least for the time being, right? And if you talk to a lot of people in the region who follow this, and this sort of arrangement with Washington is not going to change anytime soon. And even when you're talking about, high technologies, defense technologies, a lot of the IPR actually goes through the US. So US always has a say. Even if they are selling something to India, US in one way or the other may have a say on whether that's a sellable technology or not. So, I mean, look, even Netanyahu went to China and they are still talking to Russia and all those kind of things. And that's all well and good. I don't think the US really sees it as balancing per se. In technology sector, for example, China was making great strides in Israel. They wanted to tap into the talent pool specifically for their own benefit, and that has been that was a grave area of concern for the US, and I think they've made some major sort of noises in Israel, and Israel has taken a couple of steps back on that front. So that still shows you where the dynamic lies. So Israel can show, I think, till a certain extent that they are there is a concept of strategic autonomy coming in, but it's going to be much harder for them, let's say, compared to their contemporaries in Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries.
Right, really interesting. And Pia, I know you are rushing off to get back on the streets in a short while. So I'll give you the last word. And before I do, want to thank you again for the reporting you've been doing from the ground. Do follow Pia's fantastic stories on her Twitter handle, on the Print's social media, and on the Print's website. But Pia, closing remarks.
Just one thing I had to add. You had asked me about the mood on the ground and whether, the Palestinian question is as potent in the minds of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem voters. No. Not exactly, but the Iran question is, I think what's really irked people is that Iran has supplied drones to Russia in the Ukraine war. That's definitely something that has been brought up multiple times by people. So yeah, that has irked people, and that might also be a driver. Whether it's the main driver, I'm not entirely sure, but I do think it's an important factor to keep in mind.
Yeah, Kabir, I want to thank you really for making the time to talk to us today. Just so our viewers know as well, because of time zone differences, Kabir has very kindly and Pia have joined us at 12:30 at night in Delhi. So Kabir and I, being sort of the old people here, will head off to bed. And I'm sure you're going to be hitting the streets for a look at what Israel looks at night, Pia. And we'll be looking forward to some reporting on that too. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining Crosshairs. And I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Praveen.